Okay.
Tensions are simmering in the Asia Pacific. Is the Philippines heading down a path of increased militarization? Tonight, we delve into China's growing security concerns over the actions of President Marcos. We are honored tonight to have Dr. Anna Malindog-Uy. She's a PhD candidate in economics at Peking University and a columnist for the Manila Times, among other publications around the world. And she's also an expert on South China Sea's affairs. She is joining us to share her insights tonight. Also with us today will be Mr. Jerry Gray. He's a prolific China commentator and a great friend of Media Without Means. So I want to welcome both of you. We are going to be asking Dr. Malindog-Uy pressing questions regarding the recent changes in the Philippines, and we will be discussing the recent visit of U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to the country, the implications of statements from Filipino military officials regarding potential aid to Taiwan, and the newly approved acquisition of F 16 fighter jets. What do these developments signal for the future of the Philippines and its relationship with its neighbors? So let us welcome our guests today. So, first of all, Anna. Anna, how are you tonight?
I'm fine, and thank you so much. And I'm so happy to see Jerry and you being with me tonight, and having this conversation, because it seems like there's so much going on at the moment. Not necessarily one is the tariff trade war and the imposition of tariff by President Trump. That's one, and I think it's making a buzz all across the world. And even just today, earlier, I was listening to the speech of Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar, I think, and he was reacting to the imposition of tariff on Malaysia, and he was saying that since Malaysia is right now the chairman of ASEAN, so he
Hmm.
was he was saying in his speech that he's now in contact with the ASEAN leaders, and they have some kind of consultation, and ASEAN as a group, as a bloc, will be having a solid stand on this. But at the moment, Malaysia and I think other ASEAN countries did not yet some kind of they don't yet have these retaliatory measures
Hmm.
against the United States. So that's one. And then you have again my country, the Philippines, is now being drugged again, and with with this new issue of F-16 possible deal, and at the same time upcoming Balikatan exercises, which is actually this is the joint military exercise between the U.S. forces and American and Filipino forces that will be upcoming. I think this month or next month, but I think it's this month. So that is very critical. And then you have you have the South China Sea issue. I just came from the Boao forum, which I
Yeah.
attended, a sub forum on South China Sea. And I'm not kidding, Jerry and Fernando. The issue of the South China Sea, you can feel that people within the region and Southeast Asia, the sub region, Asia Pacific, and even outside of Asia Pacific, they are feeling the heat, and they're very concerned about the South China Sea as a flashpoint in Asia Pacific when you talk about possible military escalation. So I'm happy to be with you. At least I feel I'm not alone.
All right. Jerry, how are you tonight? And what is your bird's eye view of what is taking place in the Philippines?
Yeah, it's that was a pretty succinct summary there from Anna. Thank you. My bird's eye view, and I'm looking at it from outside. I have a lot of questions that I'd like to know about what's going on, basically on the street. Because Anna, you're in touch with people in the Philippines all day, every day, and you'd know a lot more about what's really happening. And all we get in the West is Western media rhetoric, as opposed to what really is going on, which is how do the people feel? Now, I know this for a fact, living in China. We all live in China, so we all know that what the West tells us is going on in China. I saw Gordon Chang on television today telling us all that there's chaos. We're all going to die in some kind of civil war again. So you just don't know what's really going on until you're talking to people who actually live there, work there, and have friends and family there, and you do. So that's really that's my interest in this. We can get all the rest of the news from the news, but what's really happening it comes from personal experience, and Anna, you have that in droves.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, and I agree with you. It's still different if you're really from a local person who's telling the story of what's going on the ground.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
What is the is there fear for what is taking place? I mean, do they find themselves being pushed
Mm,
as regular people, as the normal population, into a situation that nobody wants? I don't think China wants a war. I don't think the locals want an escalation of the situation. Nobody wants to have any incidents taking place, and everything that is being done seems to be moving in a direction in which an incident could happen at any time. Now we're talking about these F-16s. We're going to talk about that in a second. So
mm.
the question is, within the people in your family or in your circle in the Philippines, what are they saying? How do people feel about, well, these developments in the country?
Actually, that's a very good question, precisely because I think these are sentiments that are not heard by many people outside of the Philippines. But to be very frank and honest, the Filipino people, I mean, the regular Filipinos, they're so afraid of what might happen. Especially when you talk about military escalation between the Philippines and China, and even with with the backing of the United States. Many of us we don't want that. Many of us wants to have a peaceful Philippines as much as possible. You can, if you look at the social media, like X and Facebook. And
Facebook.
if yeah, usually Filipinos, we use more Facebook and X, or the Twitter. And so in my interviews, I usually share it with my followers, and even of course the followers would have their own followers too, and it's being shared all over social media. You can see the reaction that they're so angry with President Marcos Jr. with this kind of
Mm,
foreign policy that is not neutral, not independent, and very much leaning to the United States. They are not in favor of the AFP chief, Broner, saying, mentioning Taiwan invasion. And it seems that that if in any case something happened in the Taiwan Strait, if there's a military escalation in there, that we will be, as a country, will be drugged into it, and we will be part of it, when in fact we know that we are not, that's not an issue, that's this is not an issue of the Philippines. And as much as possible, as Filipinos, we just want to be peaceful. We don't want to be engaged in any conflict, and we are very much aware as Filipinos of what happened to Ukraine. Everyone in the
mm,
Philippines is aware of what happened to Ukraine, that it had, that military crisis between Ukraine and Russia, that Ukraine suffered a lot, and now Ukraine is like a hot potato that's being dropped by the
mm,
United States, and even some of the European allies. But and Ukraine is running after the United States for help, because it seems like it's being dropped out of the blue. And then you have an exchange of minerals for, for Trump to, to help them. So we know exactly what happened to Ukraine. And we don't want that to happen to the Philippines, just because we are being used as a pawn by the United States against China because of its own strategic interest in the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific region. Many Filipinos, almost all Filipinos, I'm not kidding, we don't want to be dragged into any kind of military conflicts, may it be in the Taiwan Strait or may it be in the South China Sea. We believe that there is other options when you talk about
mm,
the conflict. And you can see many Filipinos are very angry with Marcos Jr., with this very belligerent foreign policy or approach to the South China Sea. Because I think Filipinos are aware now that there are other means of trying to resolve the conflict through negotiation. And I know, and many of us know, that I don't think China wants to have a war with us. And even then, we will lose. My God, look at China and look at us. We're so small compared to China. So we're not stupid people, Filipinos, not to know the consequences of all of this. So if you ask me how Filipino feels about these things, we're so angry. We're angry. But the problem is sometimes we're helpless too. Because Marcos Jr. is the president, and at the end of the day, he has the legitimate hold on a
Mandate.
power of government. But we're trying our best to, to make our voice known and tell him, like, this is not what we want. We don't want this. It's your agenda,
I,
not our agenda as a
I think
people.
what's very difficult for people, for observers to try and understand is we all look at this the same way that you do. I mean, if there were to be a conflict, there's just no chance that the Philippines would have any chance against an army or a navy or a force like China. Um, but it's very
It
difficult
can
to
be that
understand
we'll
the
be
context and
outnumbered
the
now.
rationale behind this. It's very difficult to understand the rationale behind
Yeah,
these decisions.
Can I add something to this?
yeah.
I've
Please.
got I've got another computer open at the moment on a web page that I accidentally opened up. I was looking about the Philippines, trying to get some information about tonight to formulate some questions for you. And I've opened up The Hill, and it's not something I would normally read. I call it the CIA's monthly newsletter. Basically, this is the CIA published it. Well, The Hill published.
The
It may
hill,
not be the CIA, but it kind of looks like it. But let me read something to you.
mm,
The US and the Philippines have a mutual defense treaty first signed in
mm,
1951. We all know that.
mm,
However, this may not apply to disputed regions.
mm,
So if Taiwan is the dispute, and it's nothing to do with the Philippines at all anyway, and the Americans or the Philippine defense officer has come out and said, we will help defend Taiwan. Well, that's the Philippines. But if America are pushing them towards that, the Americans are not going to help at all because this is a dispute that doesn't affect America. They've already said that quite clearly,
mm,
and 3 successive presidents in the past have said so. But more importantly, it doesn't include the shoals and the islands and the disputed regions, which are not actually anything to do with the Philippines historically. And
mm,
so they're saying we have a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. So now this is actually in the Hill.
mm,
They're kind of negotiating their way out of helping you if it's a matter that if China attacks any of the Philippine islands, fine, defense treaty kicks in. But if there's a dispute and China happens to shoot out of the water one of the Philippines Coast Guard ships or a fishing vessel or whatever it is, if that's the premise that they're talking about, they're going to say, well, no, no, that doesn't come under our defense treaty. Because we all know for a fact the USA will happily wipe their hands of anything that they don't have to physically get involved in. They've never honored a treaty in their entire history. Why would they start doing that now? And they already have a built in loophole that they're already saying, well, this is not our problem. So, do the Filipinos, the people in the Philippines, know this? That America is not
this
going
is
to
the
help them?
question. That's a very good question because this is not known by many Filipinos. I know that the MDT, it does not cover some of the disputed areas of the South China Sea. It
Hmm,
does not. Even if there's there's a document by Henry Kissinger that actually said, like, it's like in the archives that even before, since the beginning, that the MDT is not actually, it does not cover the disputed South China Sea from the very start. But the problem is the Filipino public is blind to it. And
right.
this MDT is being used by media, by mainstream media, even by pro-American Filipinos or pro-American agents in the Philippines, saying that, and also, of course, the American and the United States saying that we have an ironclad relationship because of the MDT, and we will help, and we will be but we will back up, and we will support the Philippines when you talk about the South China Sea dispute against China. So it's always being propagated. This is the kind of narrative being spread in mainstream media. So many Filipinos is blind to the fact that actually the MDT, it does not include the disputed South China Sea
Hmm,
or parts of it. So many Filipinos believe, and in a way, if there are skirmishes in the South China Sea, and it happens a lot between the Philippines and China now, they think that just because we have the MDT, that Americans will can actually fight for us if in any case something happened in the South China Sea. But they are not really informed that actually in the treaty itself, in wordings of the treaty, there's no such thing that it covers the South China Sea.
Right.
That is something that the Filipinos are blind about.
Well,
I
the
know
Americans are now posting it online. The
yeah, yeah.
Americans are posting it online. So that's good to know.
Well, if you go to the CIA website and you look
Mm,
at the definition of these islands, the CIA define them as disputed territory. I mean,
mhm,
it's in their website. So
mm,
this is usually what I use to reply to people who comment on my videos when I talk about the situation with the Spratly Islands, and they say like, look, you have an argument with this, you should bring the argument to the CIA because they're the ones who are describing it as a disputed
mhm.
territory, which is in fact what it is at this point. Um, I also feel how serious this is as a transgression to China's red lines when you have a high rank military officer just who, as a country, are supposed to recognize the PRC and
Mm,
now saying that they're going to go and defend Taiwan. Uh, this is something that China takes extremely seriously,
mhm.
and is one of the biggest red lines there are. We all know how China reacted when Nancy Pelosi visited
Yeah,
Taiwan against everyone's advice. Even Biden told her, don't go. And well, we saw what took place, all the exercises and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is perhaps similar to that.
yeah,
It, it
yeah.
is normal
It
to
was really
expect a
crazy.
reaction from China.
It was crazy because one thing, let's put it into context, okay? The Philippines as a state or as a country recognize the one China policy. And what is the one China policy basically and fundamentally speaking? And that is actually, if you recognize the one China policy, any country, including the Philippines, it means you recognize that Taiwan is an alienable part of China. So it means
Mm,
it's their own business. It's a domestic affair
Yep.
that people outside of China or you're non-Chinese, you should not interfere in this. This is their problem. They will resolve it on their own, however they want. And the Philippines, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as Filipinos are concerned, and even as far as Marcos government is concerned, what I know, and I think this is the fact, is we recognize the one China policy. So it means that we don't have any business interfering in the Taiwan Strait or any matters related to Taiwan. And I think every Filipino who has a common sense and quite in the right mind understand this. And I think this perspective is shared by many, if not all Filipinos, because we have pro-Americans in my country too. And the Philippines is a bastion of American. Everything is there. When you talk about pro-Americans, a lot of them in there. So this is the basic. This is the fundamental. This is the context. So all of us we know this, and suddenly out of the blue, our AFP chief, the head of our armed forces, just out of the blue said that if in any case there is a Taiwan invasion, the Philippines has to be ready, and it seems like we're preparing for it for a long time already, because we
mm,
have 250,000 OFWs, or what you call overseas Filipino workers, working in Taiwan. So it
Mm.
seems like he is justifying this, that we have to rescue them. So that's why we have to prepare militarily speaking because of this. And I'm like, why do you have to say this in public at this time? What's the reason why? If it's not even the AFP, to be frank with you, in terms of government function of different ministry, on our side we call it departments. It is not the function of the armed forces of the Philippines or even the chief to even be concerned about our OFWs, or what you call overseas Filipino workers. It's the job of the Department of Labor under a specific agency, under a specific bureau, which is the Overseas Bureau. And it's the job of the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's them who will be the
that is
one talking about this, not the AFP, not the armed forces, because the armed forces has to be quiet when you talk about foreign affairs, you know. And then I was shocked. I said, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to mention, when in fact Taiwan, when anything related to Taiwan, is the red line of China. It's really the
Mm,
red line. It's one of the top red lines of China. Why? I know this very well. So I was like shocked. I said, you don't do this, especially in media. What is your purpose? Why? Because Hegseth is coming to the Philippines and you want to wag
mm.
your, like wagging dog? You act like a wagging dog, or you're wagging your tail? I mean, like, come on, give me a break, at the expense of the country. So China reacted. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China, the spokesperson said, anyone who mess up or who interferes in the affairs of Taiwan will be burned, something to that effect. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, how come that they are not even, they don't even know the sensitivity, or they're just crossing the line? Because I don't think he's stupid not to know the sensitivity of the issue. I think it's much more intentional to say these things
Yeah.
to provoke something from China. And do you really think China will just clap their hands? Of course not. My God,
Every
that's
every
very
time they say something
irresponsible.
provocative, what they
Hmm.
want is for China to respond, so they can say,
Respond, yeah.
"Look at how provocative China is being." All we
Hmm.
said is we want to protect the people if there's a problem, and now look what they're doing. So really, all
Hmm.
this is every one of these is a
Provocation.
little salami slice away from normal relations, and they're
Hmm.
just trying to get a reaction. Once they get the reaction, then they can turn that reaction onto China and say, look how provocative China has been. China has said that they're going to punish the Philippines for
Hmm.
defending Filipinos. Well, I mean, that's really bad. So that's the
Yeah,
whole
but
purpose
Yeah,
of
but
that.
Beijing is very smart. They
yeah, they're
can
smart.
differentiate between official policy of the Philippine government
Mm,
Correct.
and what could be interpreted as a personal opinion of a certain military figure. Now, what I do see is that it appears to be that the Philippines is borrowing a page from this ambiguity manual that the United
mm,
States
mm,
uses. That's the concerning part. Now, you mentioned Peter Hexet's visit and that this
mm,
could have been to maybe give him a warm welcome to the country. I wanted to ask you about his visit and
mhm,
what did it mean for the country? What were some of the things that were the outcomes of this visit,
mhm.
if you could inform our audiences?
Actually, the visit of Hexit was a bit, how do you call that? Weird, because that was March 28th, and on
Mm,
that day it was the birthday of former President Duterte. So there was
yeah,
a worldwide rally of Filipinos who are supporters of the former president. So it seems like his visit was downplayed in a way, because many Filipinos were not focusing on him. We're focusing on the birthday celebration of the former president, and there were big rallies all across the Philippines and across the world. So we really don't we did not pay attention to his visit, but
yeah,
we are more concerned about, how we gonna clamor for the release of our former president from the Hague, from the detention. But if you really look at the visit of Hegset, it was also not transparent in every way. There was not much coverage. There was not even a statement as to the general points of what the two sides have talked, when you talk about, in terms of military or agreements or economic to agreements, or to certain extent, not much. There was just a coverage that he was there, some photos, some little of videos, that's it. But from my from my monitoring, because I monitor both events, I was monitoring the birthday
the
celebration.
birthday.
Yeah, yeah, and also the I mean the rallies and demonstration. On the other hand, I was monitoring his visit, the Hexet. But I think the narrative of the visit was saying that, the United States is affirming the its iron, quote unquote, ironclad relationship with the United States through the MDT, or what you call the Mutual Defense Treaty. That's the message. But as to the details of it, there was none. The coverage of the visit was very less, and at the same time, I think we only know that visited Malacanang, and he had talks with the President Marcos Jr. and then with the Defense Secretary and the AFP Chief Broner. So that's it. And other than that, not much. But again, the narrative that was painted in public was America is backing up the Philippines. When you talk about the South China Sea issue, America or the United States will be sending or deploying high-level military assets to support the Philippines, especially when you talk about is the South China Sea dispute with China. And we have that ironclad quote unquote relationship because of the MDT. However, one thing though that we don't that we have to remember when it comes to this MDT and when it comes to this support of the so-called ironclad relationship of the United States and the Philippines, when you talk about defense and military, it's very ambiguous. I'm not kidding, Fernando and
Mm.
and Jerry. Ambiguous. They are good in this making this statement, but in action, I'm not kidding. There's none. Everything is, but they're good also in arming and militarizing us against China and pushing us to the brink, to jump off the cliff. They're good at this. But actual help, and if we're already at the brink, I don't think they will be there for us. I don't believe that the United States will die for the Philippines. I don't believe that. That's really not the case. But I believe that they will push us to the wall, where they will push us to jump off the cliff for their strategic interests and for us to be like a pawn and poke us to have a conflict with China. That I know. But
A lot
but
of
they
people,
That's
that for us, I don't think so. I really
a
don't.
lot of
Jerry.
people believe that Australia is in the same boat. They're going to
Mm.
use Australia. But Australia has a population of 24 million and about, I don't know how many ships they have. I think it's only about 10 or 12 ships, and half of them are not operable at any given time. It's a very, very small navy. And so the Australian military coming to your assistance is not going to be very useful. Japan and South Korea have just signed an agreement to handle the tariffs with
Mhm.
in a joint agreement or jointly handle the US tariffs. So the defense secretary must have been a little bit upset about that. The military attaches in the embassies over in Tokyo and uh, Seoul must be very, very disappointed with what's been going on in the trade secretary's department. So I think there's a lot of you talk about ambiguity, but there's also a lot of uncertainty about
Yes.
how cohesive America's policy will become. Because it seems that they're not going to rely too heavily on Australia. They can't rely too heavily on Japan. They can't rely too heavily on South Korea. So if
It
the
looks like
Philippines
it's the
are on their
Philippines.
own,
No,
you're done.
yeah, we are actually the only country in Asia Pacific that is would accommodate in under a Marcos Jr. government would accommodate the biddings of
Mm.
the United States. Really. Because as you can see, Japan, I don't think so. Singapore, other allies, no. And they're even angry right now because of the tariff imposition.
Mm.
Yeah.
They're reacting. The Philippines, our government is quiet about this. Why? Because Marcos Jr. is afraid that if you react negatively to the imposition of tariff around 17%, maybe Trump will get angry with him and he would lose the backing and the support and he will crumble.
I,
Domestically speaking, he crumbles.
I
He
saw
needs
a
time.
report turning it upside down. It
Yeah,
actually said in the Philippines, this is a positive thing for us because our tariffs are lower than other Asian countries and we can take advantage of that. So, in other words, we can put all of our prices up and still undercut other Asian countries. So they're seeing it, they're turning it into a positive.
yeah. I mean, like
And
we're
I
waiting. We're waiting for Marcos Jr. to react to the 17% tariff or 18%. And there are already intellectuals actually writing about this and saying, why is it that the Philippines is not even doing anything? Because Malaysia already spoke.
Yeah,
Vietnam called the Trump already. So why
yeah.
Philippines is, we're just cool. I mean, like, my God,
And
this is
China just
crazy.
slapped a 34% tariff on everything from America.
and a couple of controls and
Yes,
added
and
some
sanctions and
companies to the list
restrictions.
and
Yeah,
some rare earth minerals.
I've just made a
And I wanted
video
to pivot
about
a little
that.
bit to, I wanted to pivot a little bit to this new missiles that are going to be brought to the Philippines or have already been brought to the Philippines. There's a long history about these missiles and promises that were made and promises that were broken. And now we see more missiles being brought into the country. Could you quickly summarize what has been the story with these missiles and what is the effect beyond the Philippines? What is the effect of these missiles in the country to the security and balance of the South China Sea?
Mhm. That's a very good question. The first last year, I think there was a deployment of the Typhoon missile system, and the story behind that is it would only be used during the Balikatan, or what you call joint military air exercises between the Philippines and the American Armed Forces. And they said that September of 2024 they will be removed, but until now it is there, and it's even retransferred to another location, but it's located in the north. If you locate it in the north, it's very near Taiwan Strait. I'm not kidding.
Hmm.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
very strategic location. And now, so it was not returned, and it's there. It's in my country, and it's, I think, located in the north part of the Philippines. So now there's a new pronouncement coming from the AFP chief Broner, and even from the American side, that another Typhoon missile, I think, will be deployed. So that's the second one. And from my discussion with Dr. David O, it seems like
Yeah.
Nemesis, the missile system that will deploy this, Nemesis is the name, so something to that effect. And then earlier today, I also read the pronouncement coming from the AFP chief in the news that it's not only actually the Typhoon missile system that we are interested to buy. It's not actually deployment, just that the Americans will deploy and will take it back. Actually, right now, there is really a statement and pronouncement coming from the Armed Forces Chief of Staff that the Philippines is interested to buy these weapons, like the Typhoon missile and the missile system, other high-level weapons, including fighter jets, which is the F-16. So this is already being said in public. So it means there's the intention to buy these weapons. And look, the question is, why we need this, what it is for. Well, the justification being said is for the modernization of our military. So we are trying to modernize our military, and we're buying this weapon from the United States. So yeah, that is the situation right now. So it's not only one, there will be two Typhoon missile system and another anti and there's another system about anti missile that will be deployed as well, and other high level assets in when you talk about military, that will be deployed and sold to the Philippines in a matter of time. Yeah.
From Beijing's perspective, this deployment of this highly
Mm.
offensive
Correct.
weaponry in such close proximity to Taiwan is, of course, a significant security concern for them. My
Yes.
question to you is, I mean, how do you think China will perceive
Yeah.
these actions, and what do you think is the potential countermeasure that China may take? Because, as you've said in other videos, I've been watching to your talks with Lena and with
Mm.
Dr. O. What do you think the countermeasures will be?
I'm not kidding. When you talk about countermeasure, I think Beijing is already calculating what to do. Because with regard to the Typhoon missile system, they're actually developing now another military asset that can actually target directly the Typhoon missile system. It has been out in public news by the South Morning Post, and that was like 2 months
Hmm.
ago. So now it's undergoing development and processing. So it means China is not taking this lightly. China is not taking it setting like that they're just saying like, okay, everything is okay, it's just deployment, nothing. I don't think so. I think China would take this like this is an escalation. This is already escalation, and at the same time, of course, China as a country will not just sit down and let these things happen. It will try to prepare, and it will prepare defensively in that
Hmm.
sense. And then in terms of how we are being viewed by China, with all of this geopolitical situation going on, and being the United States being like our big brother, is we are not now being seen, for me, the way I see it from Beijing the way I read it, reading Beijing, is we are not anymore like a passive player, or we're already an active player. We're already in the front lines. We're not at the fence. We're on the front lines already. Like, that is how China will view us, with all this militarization and with all these weapons that will be deployed and already been deployed in the Philippines. That's, I think, how Beijing will see us. And if that's how Beijing sees us, it means as well that their perspective about us will change a bit. From being a friend, probably will be perceived as an adversary in that sense, if this continues. Of course, this is understandable. Any country that will be on the shoes of China will have the same reaction. It is
Mm,
natural, because you, as a country, they have also the right to be defensive and to be ready for whatever eventuality that happen vis-a-vis another country. That is natural. I don't have anything against it, because I understand this. However, I am afraid for my country, and I worry for my country, because I know the reality that we cannot be at par with China, even if we buy 2025 F-16. Even if we have the
mm,
Typhoon missile system, three of this, we will never be at par with China, militarily speaking. I know to a certain extent, I have an idea of how modern, how high level already the military capacity of China. And even when you talk about navy, I think China has the largest navy in terms of numbers at the moment.
yeah.
It is really, and in terms of its missile system, anti-missiles, it's really highly sophisticated, that we are not at par with that. And even in terms of soldiers, my God, they have a lot. And I read a story like every single Chinese would undergo like a military training. It's like a requirement for them. So it means that they have the biggest number of soldiers in the world. And oh
Mm,
my God, look at that. So I know the reality. So that is my worry, that we're being perceived now, because of all of this militarization, all of the deployment of weapons, troops on the ground, the rotational, the EDCA bases. You have 9 EDCA sites. These are actually military bases of the United States that they control, and we don't have control. And
mm.
Beijing will view us like, aha, so you are not now our friend, probably. You know what? But
In
guess what? That is Marcos Jr.'s government. Filipinos are, we Filipinos, no, it's not our position. It's, for me and many Filipinos, we know that China is not the enemy. China is our neighbor and it's our friend. And we cannot change the fact that it is our neighbor. We need to have good relation with our neighbor, because geography tells us that it will never change. So we have to have good relation. But it just so happened that our current government under Marcos Jr. really is leaning to the United States for its own survival, domestically speaking, politically speaking. That is really the fact of the matter. So he will compromise our sovereignty, our independence, and autonomy just to survive politically with the backing of the United States. And Filipinos are not comfortable about it. We don't like this. We don't want to be the next Ukraine of Asia. And he is the Zelensky of
yeah.
Asia. Really, to be frank with you. That's why many Filipinos right now in social media is reacting, saying that, oh my God, when would this guy step down? You need to resign if you cannot handle things, you know. I'm not kidding. In social media, Filipinos are so emotional and so how they expressive, to the point that if they can just have a magic wand, you know, they will just do this
Well,
one like this, and you disappear and go out and replace someone
didn't
else.
we talk about this last time we were on the show together talking about
Yeah,
this? Not only is Marcos not likely to step down, he's not even likely to step down when his term ends. He wants to take on the
that is
prime
also.
ministership. So it's not going to go away unless the country votes him out, and that's
Mhm.
looking even less likely. For the record, there's 1.3 million soldiers and sailors and airmen in the Chinese military, and there are 500,000 fully trained reserves who
Oh my
are
God.
recently retired. So if they retire from the military for a few years, they stay as reserves, and they go ongoing training. So you've got 1.8 million they can call on immediately, and
Oh
then
my
of
God.
course there's every single Chinese person that I know who says, well, if we're attacked, we'll defend our country, which is what they did 70 years ago in
Mm.
1940 or 1937. Those that could did. And so, yeah, I think it's ridiculous. It is the world's largest navy. They
Yes,
were heading towards 400 ships, surface
yes.
ships, and I don't know how many submarines they've got, and I don't think anyone does, except perhaps the Chinese navy. So that's a worry. You're probably surrounded by submarines that already have ballistic missiles aimed at you, just
I
because
think
you've done
so.
this.
Hmm.
I presume, and actually,
Yeah.
do you really think the Chinese will just sit down and look at so many deployments going on? Of course,
No.
one thing also that we have to remember in terms of AI, in terms of technology, they have the satellite up there. They can see what's going on from above. That's why I'm like, and this issue of spy, like many Chinese national in my country are not being accused of being spy. That all Chinese in my country, Chinese national, are spy. I said that's really crazy to be frank because they have a
You don't need to.
sophisticated satellite up there who can actually see everything from down. Don't you know that? I said they're
Yeah.
so advanced in terms of
This
AI.
is a reciprocal thing as well, because I think three Filipinos last week were
Yes.
arrested in China for taking
Mm,
photographs over an extended period of time, for taking
mm,
photographs
Near a
around
military
military
base.
bases and sending them back to somebody, Mr. Herrera, who was
mm,
part of the Philippine intelligence community. So yeah, there's going to be a tit for tat on that. There's going to be
mm.
retaliation, and I think at least three Chinese people will be arrested in the Philippines and
Already.
accused. Already have. Okay.
Mm,
Anna, with regards to something that we discussed in a previous video, where we were talking about the missile operation and how this requires long-term training of the officers who actually control them or are in contact with these missiles. This brings me to these F-16s. I mean, the United Congress has already agreed to sell these F-16s to the
mm,
Philippines. Are these the first F-16s in the Philippines? Are there fighter jet pilots that are trained and capable of
mm.
handling them? And what will be the use of these F-16s? Will be deployed around disputed areas? Um, what can you tell us about that?
Okay, that's really these are good questions because these are questions that I even asked in my article, and until
Mm,
now there's no answer from from the Philippine government. First and foremost, this and the plan is to buy like 20 fighter jets
Mhm.
and other
okay.
equipment alongside the fighter jets, the F-16s, and it will cost around 5.58 billion US dollars. And I don't know where my government will get it. Well, that my country will get it, to be frank, because fiscal health wise, where we have a lot of economic and financial problem in the country. To be frank, we're selling our
Mm.
gold reserve for God's sake. So where would you get that money? To be frank.
Marcos probably has it in his dad's bank account.
That is even the reason why he's now leaning to the United States. It's precisely because of that, his own family whatsoever. Um, so this is one thing. It's too expensive and costly, and I think when we buy this F-16s, if in any case it's not yet, I mean the maintenance and the spare parts is not yet part of it. It's just the cost of the aircraft per aircraft. So that's one question. Second is where would you use? What is the point of buying this? Where exactly do you want to use this? Do you want to was inside the country? We have
Seven thousand
our
islands.
yeah, it's an
It's
island, but
seven thousand islands.
where would you use this really? But I think from my reading, they're going to how they're going to use this to patrol what you call our the
E-
airspace.
EEZ,
Yeah, the
economic zone. Yeah.
airspace and economic zone of in the South China Sea, because they think that they need to do that. But what I'm saying is that is not even territorial. That is
Mm,
EEZ, and that we don't have sovereignty over that. We only have sovereign rights as far as UNCLOS is concerned. So that is
Mm.
even a question. But I think that's one of the reason why. And the third thing is, how do you gonna maintain this? Because this is costly to maintain, and do we have the money for
mm,
it? Because I'm telling you, we have a lot of financial problem in the country. And the third is, do we have really trained pilots for this? Because you cannot just drive an F-16s without trained pilots. There's a lot already of accidents going on with our pilots dropping because
mm.
they're using US aircraft, and many accidents already happened. I think 3 to 4 already died because of this. So now you have this. What if they're not trained? You need to train. And training using this military assets or aircraft takes time. So that's why when I was asked, what is it for the Philippines? Did we think, are we not thinking properly if we're going to buy this? Is it cost effective for us? Do we have the money? What is the purpose of this? Because as far as Filipinos are concerned, we don't have external enemy. We have internal enemies, the insurgents. So and for us, we have to be prudent. Is it the right time for us to buy these things, or is it really we buy this from America? Because probably there are other countries that we can source out the same aircraft, the same kind of military asset, probably same capacity and capability, but at a lower cost. And I think China is also selling some of their J10, J20, which is very less expensive and whole package. But of course, the Marcos government will not do that because they have
Mhm.
animosity with the Chinese. But that is not even prudent. That is not even pragmatic. That's not even cost effective. So these are the issues that actually I'm asking in my articles to the current administration to answer, but quiet. They just say that they're
To the
interested.
proper
They
to the
want to buy.
proper trading to the proper training of pilots.
Hmm.
My concern is when you have these close encounters between two nations' air forces, there are elements of uncertainty as to
Hmm?
what could escalate an incident. We have the incident of Hainan a few years ago, where actually a pilot from the Chinese Air Force actually died when he was trying to uh, send a spy plane from the US away from China's airspace. So, an incident like this, if the pilots don't receive the proper training and they're going to be flying side by side or in close proximity, that becomes a concern. Because what if there's an incident and now we have that spark that is going to trigger this chain of events? That is what actually, in my honest opinion, America is looking for, a trigger, something that could spark this
Hmm.
conflict, and then everything is off the table. Now Taiwan, now Japan, like that's all they need, an
Hmm.
incident that would allow them to um, do what they want to do, but they're hiding their real intentions. They just need a false flag. Jerry, how does this compare in a way, very briefly, to the Australian submarines?
Well, the Australian submarines are different because they're never going to get delivered. I think that's now an accepted fact. The United
Yes.
Kingdom has started an inquiry into this. Now, the United Kingdom started this. This was a Boris Johnson initiative. He wanted to upset the French. He wanted to inveigle himself with the Americans, and he wanted to get the Commonwealth back together as a kind of a Five Eyes type of thing. So Boris Johnson had this idea that he could upset France. He could do all of these things in one swoop just by getting Australia to cancel the French submarines and buy American. Well, they're never going to get the American submarines. That is now an almost, I would say, better than 99% certainty that America have said we are not going to deliver submarines. And no one has called for an inquiry into that in Australia yet. But in the UK, they have started an inquiry. Now, here's the thing: there is an election in Australia in just 3 or 4 weeks' time. I think third of May. So we're less than a month away from an election, and the opposition are saying, well, we're not showing leadership here, but it was them that started this. Now we've got the government in place now who immediately signed on for it, not showing leadership. So neither party really knows what's going on. It's a nightmare. I would say that the sale of planes to
Hmm.
Philippines, yes, it will probably happen. No, you can't afford it. Lockheed Martin will hold you in.
Hmm.
You'll be in court. Your country will be in court in a few years' time or you won't have them delivered because you haven't paid the proper prices for them, or the price will change because that's what they do. And there's always something extra.
Oh, they will
So
remotely disable the feature.
yeah, though that's the next thing. They can remotely disable. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, as Trump said the other day when they were launching a new PowerPoint presentation, because they haven't launched a new plane, but they were launching a PowerPoint presentation of a new plane saying, we're going to sell this to all of our allies, but we'll turn it down because we don't know if they'll stay our allies. Well, there you go. The
Why
Americans
would
are
you buy?
saying quite clearly, we don't think you will remain our allies, so we're not going to sell you the full Monty. We're only going to give
Hmm.
you a little toned down version of it so we can still defeat you if we need to. I don't know if anyone picked up on that in the Philippines. I mean,
No.
basically, do you have any? Here's another question: do you have any independent media left in the Philippines?
Uh, we do have some
Right?
very minor, not the mainstream. The
Okay.
mainstream media, to be honest and frank, are I would not categorize them as independent. They're, I think, co-opted, and they're more also co-opted by the government, the current
Hmm.
government of Marcos Jr. And at the same time, I think when you talk about narrative, they project more, or they kind of spread more the Western narrative and the United States narrative in many, especially when you talk about China and when you talk about South China Sea and even the Taiwan Strait issue. So, but we have alternative media and independent media, but these are not as strong, I think, in terms of readership or of coverage, and being, being out there and that people will have access to. So that is our challenge too. There's
Right.
also how do you call that, a struggle of trying to make it sure that the Filipino people are informed and the information they get is the right information, as against to misinformation and disinformation and fake news. Because,
Mm.
and even our mainstream media, to some extent, sometimes, or not necessarily every day, but many and most often, they also propagate fake news. So that is
Yeah.
hard that is a challenge on our side. So that's why people like me are we need to be active in social media, and share our perspective in terms of writing, in terms of interview, and like this interview, I'll share it with my in all of my social media, because that is the only way that we can
Mm.
actually tell the Filipino people that, this is really what is happening. This is not true. This is what is happening. This is the reality. You need to wake up. So this
So
is also
someone needs to tell the Philippine public that when these J16s are delivered, if they're ever
Mhm.
delivered, they will A, be much more expensive than the current price tag, B,
Mhm.
a toned down version of the J16 that the US military uses, and C, have a remote switch that they can be disabled. And you will
Mhm.
need to get a 4 or 6 digit code from the US Defense Department in order to switch the thing on.
Yes, that I agree with you. Because
Yeah.
I don't think the United States will give us that independence to that's even my contention. I said, if you buy weapons from the United States, it's either second hand for us. Usually they give us second hand. I'm not kidding. Now if we
So
buy brand
Taiwan's the
new,
same.
yeah,
Mm.
when we buy the brand new ones, which is very, very expensive, we cannot really have the independence on we cannot use it as a sovereign state, because we always be tied up to them in many terms, like operation, maintenance, spare parts, or whatsoever. So that's always the case. So the question for Filipinos really is, why do we do this over and over again? You know what? We don't learn from our mistakes. We've been doing this for the longest time. Since what? Since Second World War, or even before Second World War until now. But
Mm.
the thing is, that this is something also that Filipino has to wake up and has to realize that, this is not anymore new. But we need to do something about it. We need to cut this. But of
Yeah.
course, it's also hard, because our current government is very much dependent and leaning to the United States for its own survival, really.
I
Yeah.
guess you
And
can see the dilemma there because you are really faced with the choice of alignment. You need to align
Mm.
yourself as a relatively poor country in Asia. You need to align yourself with America for support and China for trade. This is what Australia has tried to do for many, many years. We rely on China for our trade, but we
mm,
rely on America for our military support. And China
mm,
is now saying to them, well, that's not working very well for us. You can have
Mm.
one or the other, but you can't have both. You can
mm,
rely on us for trade, but you can't have these AUKUS submarines, which are not for defense. Even
mm,
Scott Morrison, the guy who uh, started this deal for Australia, has made it quite clear we can cruise undetected around the South China Sea. Well, that's not where Australia's defence is. Australia's
mm.
defence is around the coast of Australia, and that's where they ought to be with the Collins class or the Navals that they were going to get. Good quality submarines that do a very good quality job,
Mhm.
not attack submarines that are never going to be delivered. And that's a problem with the Philippines as well. They're either never going to be delivered, or they are going to be delivered, but they're going to be too expensive, or you're not going to be able to operate them efficiently.
That's actually I
Mm.
agree with you, Jerry, on that. Very well
Anna,
said. And
I
I
wanna
agree totally. Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask you a final question to start wrapping up our video. It is obvious that one of the objectives that the Trump administration has is to disrupt the cohesiveness of the ASEAN countries. It is obvious that within that group, it seems that the easiest tool to manipulate is President Marcos. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what has been the response around ASEAN countries from your studies, from your research, from your connections and contacts regarding this militarization of the Philippines? What is the word around ASEAN countries regarding this?
And just to add, Fernando, it's not just that the United States would want to have like orchestrating some kind of this, to disrupt the cohesion or the cohesiveness of ASEAN as a bloc, of course, a member state, but even between ASEAN and China, because as you can see, China and ASEAN are very close in terms of
Yeah.
trade, in terms of economy, and that's really obvious. Our The ASEAN largest trading partner of the 10 ASEAN member states, and even an ASEAN as a bloc, is China. The relationship is very close, as in close in every sense. We have a lot active people-to-people relation. You have a lot of academics studying in China in the same manner, Chinese studying in different parts of ASEAN and member states. But I think also the United States want to have wedge. They're trying to create a wedge between the two sides using the Philippines and through this militarization also and other means. um, from my interaction with my colleagues coming from ASEAN, especially those who are claimant states of the South China Sea, many ASEAN states, even my friends, ordinary people from ASEAN, they are not comfortable with this. They're not comfortable with the fact that one member of ASEAN is being militarized, and they don't like it because it creates tension in the region, and they are being forced. The problem is like this: ASEAN countries now is being forced to take sides in some ways because we are a member of ASEAN. So in a way,
Mm.
we demand loyalty from other members of ASEAN. I mean, actually, Marcos Jr. is trying to do that, saying trying to talk to Vietnam, trying to talk to Malaysia that when you talk about the code of conduct, let's just have our own code of conduct among ASEAN member states who have claims in the South China. Let's take away. Let's not include China, just us. But how can you do that when China is also a claimant state? So if you can, and if you see it, even within ASEAN member states, there is some kind of tension when you talk about the Philippines because, in a way, the Philippines is trying to say like, forget about China. Let's just us, and China is bully or something to that effect, which is not good because ASEAN relationship with China actually is solid. So in a way, there's a tension, there's a problem in there. But of course, ASEAN, as much as possible, wants to be a solid bloc and wants to assert its ASEAN centrality. But even then, ASEAN member states, I think, is not they're not comfortable at the moment how the Philippines behaves when you talk about the South China Sea, when you talk about the Taiwan Strait, and when you talk about its very much leaning foreign policy to the United States because it's not neutral. And one of the values of ASEAN member states, and even if you look at the foreign policies of other ASEAN countries, very obvious. They always have this independent foreign policy and they stay neutral. neutral with all of these major powers. They can relate to any major power. Look at Vietnam, look at Malaysia.
Mm.
But on our side, we really is very under Marcos Jr. You can see it. China is like an is we have a very we have an antagonistic relationship with China at the moment. You have a rising xenophobia in the Philippines. All national Chinese national, even they are just ordinary people, are now being tagged as spies. Even our defense secretary, the defense secretary of my country, even said in an interview that there is, according to him, a law in China that would imply that all Chinese is in the Philippines, nationals or in the China doing business whatsoever are spies. That is crazy to even say that. Really, to be frank with you. So you can see that for ASEAN countries, this is very difficult. But the thing about ASEAN is they will not say this in public. They will they will talk about all of this thing in private. But if you talk to them in private, you can sense that they are not happy with what's going on because it creates tension. And the militarization of the Philippines by the United States to a greater extent will provoke some kind of a regional arms race because other ASEAN states will also be provoked to arm themselves because one ASEAN member is arming. And one thing that you have to remember, ASEAN as a body and as a bloc, we adhere to what you call neutrality, and we see that Southeast Asia should be a zone of peace and neutrality. It should be a zone of peace. But how can you have a zone of peace and neutrality when one of your member states is being armed by an external force, an external power? So this is really the case at the moment. But I think the ASEAN leaders are trying its best to, to assert and maneuver that we have this so-called ASEAN centrality, that when you talk about defense, military affairs in the region, it should be ASEAN lead. ASEAN would lead like that. But it's very difficult at the moment having one member that is creating some kind of tension and an atmosphere that is very uncomfortable for others. And I don't think ASEAN leaders would want to have not so good relation with China. I think almost all ASEAN leaders and ASEAN countries would want to have that good relation with China, especially when you talk about economics and trade, because it's very obvious. China is, I mean, ASEAN country needs China and China needs us, ASEAN, when you talk about economic relationship and all economic activities in the region. So that is
Especially now.
an atmosphere,
That's all you
especially
need to
now
know.
because you have tariff.
That's all
Uh,
you need to know. If there's a good relationship between China and ASEAN, that's what America wants to upset.
Yeah, I know America is trying to create a wedge, trying to disrupt this, to separate, ASEAN as a bloc or the countries and China. But that's very difficult because I don't think leaders in ASEAN, except our president, are stupid. They're smart and they're mature, politically speaking. They're pragmatic leaders like Anwar and of Malaysia is very pragmatic. I think they know where they put themselves, where they position themselves. I'm really like sad that we have, and in our side, in my country, it's just so unfortunate that our leader is not is not at par with the rest of ASEAN leaders, I
Mm.
think, at this time. But I am not hopeless. It's not hopeless though, Jerry and Fernando, because there's such a thing as a time, hopefully a time that things will change. But that is hard also for Filipinos like me because we need to be patient. It takes time, and the situation is getting tight, and my country's I feel like my country is going down the drain, that we need
Mm.
to do something, but it's so hard because the time frame for a change of leadership is not yet there. It's really difficult for Filipinos to understand these things both domestically and externally speaking. Like me, when I look at my country, in relation to China, in relation to the region, in relation to the world, it's so difficult for me. I have difficulty in trying to. Oh my God, what's going on?
Why do we do
Oh,
this? Why do we
yeah.
do
Why?
this?
Why it happened like this? It should not be like this. And
What would happen today, Anna? What would happen today if Chinese people go? Because I was in the Philippines about 6, 7 years ago for a holiday. The place was swarming with Chinese tourists. It was very good for
Mm.
business. It was a lot of fun because at one stage I was doing the translating for some Chinese people who didn't speak English, and I'm doing translating to the restaurant. You know what they want? They wanted spaghetti. They wanted noodles actually, but the restaurant only sold spaghetti. So I said, "Yeah, spaghetti, Italy noodles, Italian." So I was doing this translation for people. I thought it was quite funny because my Chinese is quite functional, and that's about all. But my English is better than theirs, and we were having this great conversation. It was a lot of fun. A lot of Chinese people there doing business. A lot of them on holidays. There's a lot of Chinese in the holiday area. There's a lot of small Chinese businesses. Is it still the same? Are Chinese people still welcome there?
No,
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 that's a
it's not.
pity.
It's really it's dangerous actually for Chinese nationals at the
Okay,
moment in my country. It's because of the xenophobia that is very evident and prominent, and
yeah,
it's also because there is this. I don't know. I mean, like many. I mean, the government, especially like law enforcement agency, not all, but some are they because of the South China Sea dispute. They think that the national Chinese national in the country are all spies, and they're
right.
spying on the Philippines and spying on military, on our military, on the EDGA bases and all this. I mean, like, my God, if China want to spy on the Philippines, it doesn't need to send these people or anyone at all. They can do it from up on the they have a
Mm.
very sophisticated satellites that can see everything, even from
Hey,
they have
though.
sophisticated things, my God. They just zoom. Even Google, you can use Google to zoom a place. How much more a satellite that's so sophisticated with all the AI and everything. So that's
Yeah.
why it's sad. It's a very sad thing because during the time of President Duterte, the second largest number of tourists in my country that brings a lot of money for us and revenue, the Chinese. The first one is South Koreans, then Chinese. Now the Chinese is only very low. I don't think the Chinese wants to go to the Philippines to do business or even do tourism. We
That's a
have a
pity.
very low number of tourists, even, or even just businessmen. They don't want to go to the Philippines anymore, the Chinese businessmen, because they're
Mm.
afraid. You know why? It's not only about the animosity or what you call the xenophobia, the rising xenophobia, but there are kidnappings going on, kidnap for
Yes.
ransom.
Right. Okay.
There
That's a pity.
are things like that. It's sad. It's sad.
I've been going to the Philippines since 2011. I've been there many times. It used to be like a weekend getaway for me. Like I would
Mhm.
go Friday night and come back Monday in the morning, take the red eye flight, go to Cebu, take a taxi, go to
Mm,
Malapascua,
mm,
dive 2 3 days and fly
mm.
back. That was normal for me, uh, once or twice a month back in the day. And what you would see is what you were saying, just lots of Chinese people
Yeah,
everywhere.
Mm.
And that's going to have an impact in
yeah.
the tourism
Eventually,
industry,
tourism
and
industry.
the people to people communication that is getting lost. Well,
Mhm.
Anna and Jerry, we have run our hour. We said we wanted to be short, but this is a topic that requires a lot of uh, spreading. A lot of people
Mhm.
need to know this around the world, in the Philippines, around Southeast Asia, and in America also, for people to understand what these moves are doing to the region, to the South China Sea, to all these neighboring countries that all they want is peace, and that's being upset by one of those member countries that has a leader that appears to be compromised, that appears to be in the
Yes.
pocket of the U.S. government. So, Anna, Jerry, please forgive me for taking so much of your time so late at night, but
Pleasure.
thank you so much for being here. Any last thoughts, Jerry, Anna?
For me, thank you so much, Fernando. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for providing me the platform to explain this issue. And I just really hope that that there's light under at the end of the tunnel. There's light. Really, that is my
Mm,
hope. And I just hope that as a country and as a people, we'll be able to rise up from all of these things that's going on with the Philippines. It's difficult, but I think as long as we have hope, and I think as long as we have people who believes that we can make a difference, then I think I'm trying to convince myself that there is hope.
Jayo,
I'd
Jayo,
like
cool heads.
I'd like to see the Philippines invited to the BRICS conference in July. See how that goes.
Hopefully, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Just not under the current climate, but I mean,
Mm,
that's a future. Yeah, that's the light
Yeah,
at the end of the tunnel.
hopefully,
that's
hopefully.
dreaming and should never stop dreaming. Well, everybody, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. You know what to do: like, comment, share, and subscribe. And well, follow these two very important people who are excellent commentators on China, Southeast Asia, South China Sea. You know what to do. All right, guys, that's it for today.
Thank
So we'll
you.
see you again. Take it easy and bye for now.